Jace Rowan had been flying cargo ships since he was barely old enough to rent one. Now, at 32, he looked almost as worn out as his ship. His freighter, the Wayfarer, was old, noisy, and held together by skill, stubbornness, and a little luck. The paint on the hull had peeled away in long strips. One landing fin made a grinding sound every time he touched down. The cockpit smelled like burnt wiring, cold coffee, and engine oil. But the ship still flew, and that was enough for Jace. He was heading toward Halo Station, the largest orbital port in the Arkan Belt. From a distance, it looked beautiful, an enormous ring of silver metal and bright lights spinning above a blue-white planet. Thousands of ships passed through it every cycle. Traders, soldiers, diplomats, refugees. If you moved through this side of the galaxy, sooner or later you passed Halo Station. Jace had docked there many times before, but this time something went wrong. Halfway through the approach lane, the Wayfarer's guidance panel flickered, then failed for 3 long seconds. That was all it took. The ship drifted off course and slid into a protected corridor marked for military traffic only. Red warning lights flashed across the cockpit. A sharp voice burst through the comms. Unidentified cargo vessel, cut engines immediately and prepare for security review. Jace leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Of course, he muttered. Why not? When the ship finally locked into the docking clamps, 2 station officers were already waiting outside the airlock. They were Keth, tall, armored beings with smooth black shells and narrow silver eyes. Their movements were exact and cold, like machines pretending to be alive. Most travelers found them terrifying. Jace mostly found them annoying. The first officer scanned his ship's registration. The second lifted a handheld reader and swept it over Jace's face, chest, and hands. The device checked identity, pulse, temperature, species, and who knew what else. Jace stayed quiet. Years in cargo work had taught him one important lesson. Arguing with station security never made anything faster. The first officer looked at the screen, then at Jace, then back at the screen. Human? The officer asked. Sure, last time I checked. The officer immediately handed back his transit chip and stepped aside. You may proceed. Jace blinked. That's it? The officer said nothing. Jace frowned. I crossed into a restricted lane. Don't you need a report, a fine, a lecture? The officer's silver eyes did not move. You are human. Proceed. For a moment, Jace just stood there. Then he took the chip and walked past them. He had seen this before, not every time, but enough times to notice. Humans were treated differently at checkpoints. Other species got stopped, questioned, delayed. Humans got scanned and then waved through. Jace had never really cared why, but someone else did. 3 levels above the docking bay, a young diplomat named Saren Vale stood on a glass observation bridge and watched the entire thing. And for the first time in months, the question burning inside him became impossible to ignore. Why were humans the only ones who never needed permission? And what kind of history could make an entire galaxy leave one door forever open? Saren decides to search the oldest station records, and what he finds is not a rule, but a warning someone tried to bury. Saren did not leave his office for the next 3 hours. The station around him moved through its normal cycle. Cargo alarms sounded in the lower rings. Diplomatic messages crossed the network. Somewhere outside his door, 2 aides argued softly about docking schedules. But inside his office, none of that mattered. He kept replaying the broken recording. The voice was old, rough, and full of static. Most of the message had been destroyed by time. Only one sentence had survived. Do not lock them out. Whatever happens, never lock the humans out. Saren sat very still after hearing it the 7th time. This was no ordinary order. It was not written like policy. It sounded like fear. Not the fear of an enemy attack, not the fear of political failure. It was deeper than that. It sounded like the kind of fear that only comes after someone has already seen a disaster with their own eyes. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the dim ceiling lights. "Who were you warning us about?" he whispered. At first, he had thought the answer would be simple. Maybe humans had won some war. Maybe they had saved a colony. Maybe the old founders had rewarded them with a special rule that no one dared remove. But the audio changed everything. This was not gratitude alone. This was memory. And memory, Saren knew, was more dangerous than law. He opened every secondary archive Halo Station allowed him to access. Old border reports, founding charters, military records with half their lines blacked out, early Accord messages. Most of it led nowhere. Broken files, missing links, locked folders with no explanation. It felt less like history and more like someone had taken history apart piece by piece. That scared him even more. Near the end of the 4th hour, he found a reference point buried inside a transport ledger. It was small, almost invisible, just one coded line attached to a sealed historical index. Primary source relocation, Asara Deep Archive, access tier, read-only, Morvathi supervised. Saren's pulse jumped. Asara, the old home of the First Accord Council. If the answer still existed anywhere, it would be there. He sent a secure message at once. There was only one person he knew in the Asara archive network, a Morvathi archivist named Ulara Sen. He had met her 2 years earlier during a cultural records exchange. She had a calm voice, endless patience, and the strange habit of answering questions with silence before words. Saren had helped her decode a Tassari language map once. She had said she owed him a favor. He hoped she meant it. Her reply arrived 42 minutes later. Limited entry approved. Read only. No copies. No public release without archive consent. Come alone. Saren let out a slow breath he had not noticed he was holding. That should have calmed him. Instead, it made the whole thing feel more real. He stood, grabbed his travel coat, and looked one last time at the frozen sound wave on his screen. Never lock the humans out. A sentence like that did not survive centuries by accident. It survived because someone needed the future to remember it. And now Saren was on his way to find out what kind of nightmare had forced an entire galaxy to leave one species every door. Saren stopped at the edge of the dark water and looked at Ulara. She did not move closer. She floated in the still black pool like part of the archive itself, silver skin shining under the low blue light. Around her, soft symbols drifted through the water like tiny stars, trying to remember their own names. Her question still hung between them. Are you ready to see what the galaxy did when fear was stronger than mercy? Saren wanted to say yes right away, but the truth was more difficult. No, he said quietly, but I'm here. For the first time, Ulara gave the smallest sign of approval. Not a smile, exactly. Morvathi did not smile the way land species did, but something in her eyes softened. That is usually the only kind of ready that matters, she said. She turned and glided deeper into the chamber. Saren followed along the narrow stone path built around the water's edge. The air grew colder with every step. The pale lights behind him faded. Ahead, the lake darkened into something ancient and heavy, as if this part of the archive held memories no one had touched for generations. Ulara raised one long hand. The water answered. Lines of amber light rose slowly from below the surface and spread across the chamber. They did not look like records now. They looked like scars. Saren's translation screen flickered to life. The first files opened.
He expected war reports, fleet logs, numbers, orders. Instead, the first thing he saw was a list of denied entry requests. A refugee carrier turned away from a Vale port. A hospital shuttle refused landing at a Tassari station. A civilian convoy blocked by Drenny's shield law. A Morvathi sea gate sealed while children waited on the surface in emergency pods. Saren stared at the names and ship counts, and his mouth went dry. These were not enemy vessels, he said. No, Ulara replied. Most were families. He read further. Again and again, the same reason appeared. Border lockdown active, no exceptions. Protect internal population. Await command review. No unauthorized entry. The words were clean. The deaths behind them were not. Saren scrolled with shaking fingers. He saw distress calls that ended mid-sentence, medical requests answered with silence, military units begging to cross Allied territory so they could reinforce collapsing systems, only to be denied because no one wanted risk inside their own walls. The Iru were still advancing, yes, but now Saren saw the deeper wound. The galaxy had not only been attacked from outside, it had been abandoned from inside. His chest tightened. We teach this as the time of the breach, he said, as if the monsters did all of it. Ulara's voice was soft, but it carried through the room like a bell in deep water. That is the easier version. Saren looked up from the screen. And the harder one? The harder one, she said, is that fear made decent people choose cruel things and call them necessary. The next record opened before he could answer. It was a visual log from a border station. The image was damaged, full of static and broken color, but the scene was still clear enough to wound him. Beyond the closed docking gate floated 3 small civilian ships, their running lights weak, their hulls scarred. On the station side of the gate, armed officers stood in perfect rows. No one opened the door. A child's voice came faintly through the damaged audio, asking if they were safe now. The recording ended there. Saren looked away too late. His eyes burned. And this, Ulara said from the dark water, was only the beginning. He turned back toward the glowing records, breathing harder now, because he understood at last that the warning about humans had not been born from admiration alone. It had been born from shame. Then Ulara opened the next archive layer, and Saren came face to face with the first human message sent into a dying galaxy. We are still open. Come, now.
The next archive layer opened in a rush of amber light. Saren flinched as lines of text spread across the screen. Then the words settled, and one message appeared in the center, repeated in dozens of languages, over and over like a heartbeat carried through the dark. We are still open. Come now. For a long moment, Saren just stared at it. No long speech, no debate, no careful legal wording, just a door thrown wide in the middle of panic. Who sent it? He asked, his voice low. Ulara moved through the cold black water beside him. One of the first human captains to break the sealed routes, she said. Not the most important, not the strongest, just one of the first to say out loud what the others were already doing. The next records began to load. This time they were not quiet lists or hidden warnings. These were live reports, navigation logs, broken calls, desperate voices speaking over each other in fear. A human cargo cruiser named Long Horizon was docked near the border when the lockdowns began. It was not a warship. It had no serious weapons. Its crew were freight workers, mechanics, medics, and pilots who usually spent their days carrying machine parts, processed food, medical stock, and fuel cells between outer colonies.
Then the distress calls started. One refugee transport full of families had reached a closed gate and was begging for docking rights before its air ran out. A Vale military outpost had wounded soldiers trapped behind a security seal with no medicine left. A research team had vital wormhole data but could not get through a quarantine corridor because every station on the route had locked itself down. Saren's hands tightened. All of them were denied, he asked. Yes, Ulara said. The next line opened. A bridge log. The human captain had stood over the navigation table, looking at sealed routes crossing half the map. Every path to those people led through gates he had no right to use, corridors that could get him fired on, and military zones where one wrong move meant death. His first officer had told him the truth. They were outgunned, under-armored, and very likely going to die. He answered with one sentence, "Then we go fast." Saren swallowed hard. The next record played as audio. The captain opened a ship-wide channel and told his crew exactly what he planned to do. No lies, no hero talk, just the truth. This would be dangerous. It would probably be illegal. Anyone who wanted off the ship could leave now. No one left. Then the captain switched to open frequencies and sent one final message into locked space. This is the human vessel Long Horizon. We are coming through. Do not fire. Saren closed his eyes for 1 second. He could almost hear the silence that must have followed, the waiting, the fear, the terrible understanding that once that ship moved, there would be no turning back. When he opened his eyes again, the next image was already forming in the water. A sealed border gate, a human ship accelerating toward it, and on the other side, thousands of lives hanging on whether one impossible act of courage would be enough. The gate begins to open, but what the humans find waiting beyond it is worse than Saren imagined, and only the first of many doors they will have to break through. The barrier peeled back in slow blue layers. For one breathless second, nobody on the long path moved. The bridge was silent except for the low hum of damaged systems and the hard sound of people trying not to breathe too loudly. Then Carla pushed the ship forward. "Go, go, go," Eli said. The freighter slipped through the narrow opening just before the quarantine seal began to close again behind them. Warning lights flashed red across the controls. Sam dropped back into the ship through the outer hatch, half frozen inside his suit and breathing so hard he could barely speak. But he had done it. The gate was open. They were through. And what waited on the other side made the whole bridge go still. The refugee vessel was drifting. Not flying, not holding position, just drifting in the dark like a body in water. Its engines were dead, its lights were weak and uneven. One side of the hull was scorched black, and the emergency beacons were blinking slower than they should have been, like a heartbeat close to stopping. Through the forward cameras, Saren could see frozen fog leaking from a vent seam, turning silver in the light from the long path. Carla whispered, "Oh no." Eli did not answer. He was already moving. "Bring us alongside. Easy. Match spin." His voice stayed calm, but everyone heard the edge under it. The refugee ship had been built for maybe 2,000 passengers. The scan came back with almost double that number, 4,000 life signs, packed so close together that the readout looked like static. Internal heat was low. Oxygen was almost gone. Several decks had no light at all. When the airlocks finally joined, the first thing that came through was the smell. Sweat, metal, sickness, fear. Then the people. Tassari families stumbled into the receiving bay in silence, carrying children wrapped in blankets, carrying old ones who could no longer walk, carrying bags that looked too light to hold anything worth saving. Most were too tired even to cry. Some stared at the human crew as if they were not real. A little boy near the front asked in a cracked voice, "Did the station finally let us in?" No one answered for a second. Then Nora knelt in front of him and said gently, "No, but we did." That broke something in the room. The crying started after that, not loud at first, just one person, then another, then a sound that spread like a tear through cloth. Grown adults who had been holding themselves together for too long finally let go. One woman dropped to her knees in the cargo bay and pressed both hands over her face. A man holding two daughters just stood there shaking. Eli watched from the internal comm screen and closed his eyes for one short moment. Then he got back to work. They opened every spare compartment on the ship, crew bunks, storage bays, maintenance corridors, even parts of the machine deck. Water was rationed, emergency oxygen reserves were shared, food stores meant to last months were cut open in minutes. No one complained, no one counted what they were giving up, because now the long path was no longer just a freighter, it was shelter. And still there was no time to rest. As the last of the refugees crossed over, another distress signal lit up the board, then another, then three more. A wounded military post, a science station cut off behind a second lock line, civilian pods trapped near a collapsing corridor. Carla looked at the growing list, then at Eli. "We can't save all of them," she said quietly. Eli stared at the signals for a long time. Then he answered in the saddest voice Saren had heard yet. "No," he said, "but we're not leaving while there's still someone to reach." Outside the view screen, the dark swallowed the broken refugee ship. Ahead of them, deeper in sealed space, more locked doors were waiting. The next distress call comes from inside a Vale military blockade, and this time, if Eli keeps going, someone with guns will have to decide whether saving lives is still a crime.
The blockade stayed behind them. No shots, no warning fire, no last-second missiles tearing through the dark. Just silence. For a few long seconds, no one on the long path said anything. Carla kept both hands tight on the controls, as if she still expected the Veil guns to wake up and tear them apart from behind. But the view screen stayed clear. The warships held their line. Their weapons remained dark. Eli let out a slow breath. "Keep moving," he said. Ahead of them, the damaged outpost turned slowly in the black. One side burned and nearly half its lights dead. It looked less like a station and more like something that had already been given up for lost. Parts of the outer shell had been torn open. Emergency beacons blinked weakly along the rim. The docking arm on the east side was gone entirely. "Life signs?" Eli asked. Nora answered from the medical station. "Still there. Fading, but still there." That was enough. Carla guided the long path toward the surviving airlock. The ship shuddered once as the magnetic clamps locked into place. Before the seal was even fully secure, the rescue teams were already moving. The doors opened. The first soldiers came through on stretchers. Some were conscious, though barely. Some were burned. Some had lost limbs. Some had bandages so soaked through that it was hard to tell where the cloth ended and the blood began. One young Veil soldier kept trying to sit up and ask whether the blockade had broken. Another looked at the humans around him with dull, confused eyes, as if he could not understand why anyone had actually come. Nora did not waste a second. "This side for critical cases," she ordered. "Hydration packs there. Sam, I need power rerouted to Medbay 3, now." Sam nodded and ran. Danny, no, not Danny here, Siren thought somewhere deep inside the record. It was the old crew, the first ones, watched as Eli's people turned cargo space into a hospital again. Refugees were already packed into bunks, corridors, and supply holds. Now wounded soldiers were added to the same ship, laid side by side with civilians from another species, breathing the same borrowed air. No one argued. No one said, "These are not our people." They simply made room. That was what struck Siren the hardest. The humans did not rescue based on alliance, border, or rank. A crying child, a stranger in uniform, a scientist carrying dangerous knowledge. It made no difference. If someone was trapped behind a closed door, They went. Hours passed in a blur of motion. The long path took aboard every survivor the outpost still had. Some did not make it through the transfer. Others clung to life by a thread, while Nora and the other medics fought for every breath they could save. Eli stayed on the bridge the whole time, watching timers, fuel counts, route failures, and distress calls that kept multiplying instead of stopping. The outpost had not been the end. It had only been the second stop. The records show the Veil soldiers were almost gone by the time the long path docked, and Eli's crew brought them aboard while medics worked through the night. By the third day, other human ships had begun joining them, freighters, shuttles, even private craft, forming a rough rescue fleet held together by courage more than command. Carla stepped beside Eli and looked at the growing signal board. More calls, more sealed routes, more people nobody else was going to help. "We're turning one ship into a miracle, but miracles run out," she said quietly. Eli looked at the names flashing on the board. Then another signal appeared. A Morvathi research station trapped behind a quarantine barrier. Critical wormhole data, no authorized exit. Sam read the file and went pale. That data could matter. A lot. Eli nodded once. Then they're next. Carla stared at him. "That gate will be worse than the others." "I know. And if the ship takes much more damage, I know that too." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nora's voice came through the comm from medbay, tired but steady. "Bridge, some of the Veil soldiers are awake. One of them asked who gave us permission to come." Eli looked out at the stars. "What did you tell him?" he asked. Nora answered, "I told him nobody did." For the first time in hours, Carla gave a tired, crooked smile. The long path turned away from the dead outpost and pushed deeper into sealed space, carrying refugees, wounded soldiers, and a crew that had already given more than any law could ask. Behind them, the blockade remained silent. Ahead of them waited a stronger gate, and this time, opening it would cost them blood. The next quarantine barrier cannot be hacked from a safe distance, and to reach the trapped scientists, Eli will have to force the long path into a move that should destroy the ship. The long path moved toward the quarantine barrier with the slow, heavy grace of a wounded animal. No one on the bridge spoke for several seconds. The barrier filled the front screen like a wall made of frozen lightning, bright lines crossing and folding over each other in sharp blue patterns. It was larger than the others, harder, cleaner, built not just to stop ships, but to make the idea of getting through feel foolish. Sam was already working. His fingers flew across the console while streams of code rolled down his screen. Sweat ran along the side of his face. He wiped it away without looking up. "Anything?" Carla asked. "Working on it." That was 10 minutes ago. Now it had been nearly 2 hours. The answer had not changed. Sam hit one final key, stared at the result, and leaned back in silence. That silence said enough before he ever opened his mouth. "I can't crack it," he said at last. "Not from here. Not from anywhere, I think. This system is layered, isolated, and old. Whoever built it did not want it opened once it was sealed." The bridge felt colder after that. Behind them, the patchwork convoy drifted in scattered formation. Human freighters, passenger craft, private shuttles overloaded with refugees, wounded soldiers, and the last scraps of hope still moving through locked space. Ahead of them, trapped behind the barrier, was the Morvathi research lab carrying the one thing the galaxy desperately needed: the map. The structural model of the collapsed wormhole, the possible key to sealing the breach. If they turned back now, the scientists stayed behind. If the scientists stayed behind, then every death so far might become only the beginning. Carla folded her arms tightly. "So that's it? We came all this way to die in front of a locked door?" "No," Eli said. His voice was calm, but there was something hard inside it now. Sam looked up. "Captain, there is one option." Nobody liked the sound of that. Sam pointed at the barrier schematics. "There's a manual release assembly on the outer frame, emergency use only. It isn't connected to the main control net. That's why I can't reach it."
Carla stared at the image, then realization hit her face. No. Sam did not argue. If a ship could dock directly against the frame, exactly against it, someone might trigger the release by hand. Carla turned to Eli. That's not a maneuver, that's suicide with math. Eli studied the glowing diagram. The release node was small, half buried in armored plating, positioned at an angle that would force the long path to press dangerously close to the barrier itself. One bad drift, one wrong burn, and they would scrape against the field hard enough to tear the ship open. How bad? Eli asked quietly. Very. Sam gave him the honest version. That's not a number. It's the only one I've got. On the medical deck, Nora was still fighting to stabilize the worst of the outpost survivors. In cargo, frightened families were trying to sleep shoulder to shoulder. Every corridor of the ship was full. Every system was strained. The long path was already carrying more lives than it had ever been built to hold. Carla stepped closer to Eli. If we damage the lower hull, we lose atmosphere. If we lose attitude control, we drift into the barrier. If we lose the barrier window, I know, Eli said. Her jaw tightened. Then say no. He did not. He looked out at the cold blue wall ahead of them and then beyond it, as if he could already see the trapped lab on the far side. There are people behind that gate, and they're holding the one thing that might end this. Carla's eyes burned with anger now, but it was not anger at him. It was fear dressed in sharp edges. And if this kills us? Eli turned to her. Then at least we died moving. For a moment, the bridge was silent except for the low shake of the engines. Then Carla closed her eyes once, opened them, and sat back down at the helm. Fine, she said quietly, but if we do this, we do it clean. Sam swallowed hard. I'll suit up. Eli shook his head. No time. You guide from inside. Carla flies. I'll handle the release team. Carla looked at him like she wanted to fight him again. She did not. Outside, the barrier burned across the dark. Inside, the crew of the long path began preparing for a maneuver that should never have worked. And somewhere beyond that wall, the trapped scientists were still waiting, not knowing a battered human ship was about to throw itself at a locked gate just to reach them. When the long path makes contact with the barrier frame, the whole ship starts to break, and in the middle of the chaos, Eli has only seconds to choose between saving the ship or opening the door. Contact in 5, Carla said. The long path shook under her hands as she guided it toward the barrier frame. Every warning light on the bridge was alive now. The ship was too full, too damaged, and too tired for this kind of move. One mistake would tear the lower hull open. But Carla did not make mistakes. 3. Sam stood at his console, pale and focused, feeding numbers into the guidance system faster than Saren could follow. Eli was already strapped into a crash harness near the side hatch with 2 crew members from the release team. He had a tether on his suit, a manual trigger tool at his belt, and the kind of calm that only made everything feel more serious. 2. The blue-white barrier burned across the front screen like lightning frozen into a wall. 1. The ship hit. Not a crash, not quite, more like a brutal scrape that ran through the whole hull with a scream of metal and sparks. The long path lurched hard to one side. Consoles flashed. Somewhere below them, something heavy tore loose with a deep, ugly sound. "Lower hull compression," Sam shouted. "We're buckling on deck 3. Carla fought the controls with both hands. Holding. Barely. The bridge tilted again. A power conduit burst somewhere aft, and the lights flickered red. One crew member was thrown out of their seat and slammed into the floor. Another grabbed the rail just in time to stop from falling into a sparking panel. Eli did not look back. "Seal me out," he said. Carla turned toward him. "Eli!" Now, the outer hatch opened. For one terrible second, he vanished into the blinding light beyond the hull, tether lines snapping tight behind him. The 2 others followed, pulled across the outer shell toward the manual release assembly, half buried in armored plating. Inside the ship, the damage kept getting worse. "Atmosphere leak on lower maintenance," Sam said. Containment doors are closing. Close them faster, Carla snapped. I'm trying. Saren could almost feel it through the record now. The ship groaning, people below deck holding walls to stay upright, medics trying to keep patients calm while the floor shuddered beneath them. Refugees packed in corridors, wounded soldiers strapped to emergency cots, scientists on the far side of the gate still waiting. Then Eli's voice came through the comm, rough with static. Found it. Sam pulled up the readout. The release arm is jammed. Mechanical lock is fused. Can you open it from inside? Eli asked. No. A pause. Then Eli again. Then I'll force it. Carla looked like she wanted to break something. That mechanism is outside the field edge. Eli, if the ship slips, I know where I am. The bridge shook so hard this time that sparks rained from the overhead panels. Sam's voice cracked. We are losing structural alignment. 40 seconds, maybe less. Carla looked at the main screen, then at the status board, then at the blinking life signs packed inside her ship. If she pulled away now, she might still save the long path. If she held position, Eli might get the gate open, but the ship might die doing it. For one moment, she closed her eyes. When she opened them, the choice was already made. Hold all clamps, she said. Sam stared at her. Carla, hold them. On the hull, Eli braced himself against the manual release bar and threw his full weight into it. Nothing. He adjusted, planted one boot against the plating, and pulled again. Still nothing. The calm filled with his breathing. Then came the sound of metal snapping, and suddenly Sam shouted, Movement! I've got movement! The barrier flashed. The whole ship screamed. A red warning lit across the board. Lower hull failure imminent. Carla did not move. Neither did Eli, because now there was only one thing left to learn. Would the gate open before the long path broke apart?
The gate opened. Not all at once. It shuddered first, blue light bending and cracking across the frame. Then the barrier split just enough for Carla to move. Now! Sam shouted. Carla did not hesitate. She slammed power into the engines, and the long path dragged itself through the opening, with metal screaming all along the lower hull. The ship cleared the gate only seconds before the barrier snapped shut again behind them. For one breath, the bridge went silent. Then the proximity alarms exploded. Contacts, Sam yelled. Multiple fast movers coming in from the outer corridor. The front screen lit up with red markers, far too many and closing fast. The Ira had found them. Saren felt cold spread through him as the archive image sharpened. The enemy ships looked wrong even on damaged old records. Thin, hooked things that moved too sharply, like claws slicing through water. They came in a swarm, not a formation, cutting across the dark toward the human convoy with terrifying speed. Carla's voice turned to iron. Battle approach. Tell the convoy to scatter by groups and hold close to the larger ships. They're civilians, Sam said. They're alive, Carla snapped back. I'm trying to keep it that way. The first strike hit one of the escort shuttles to port. It vanished in a burst of white light and spinning debris. No warning, no mercy. The second hit the long path. The blast tore into the lower deck with a force that threw people across the bridge. Panels burst, smoke filled the air. Saren saw Eli lifted from his crash frame and hurled hard into the far wall. The sound of it made even the archive room feel painful. Captain down, someone shouted. Carla grabbed the controls before the ship could roll. Seal the breach, seal it now. Sam was already moving, blood running from a cut over one eye. Lower deck is gone, 2 compartments breached, fire in the maintenance spine. Count later, fly now. Below deck, the convoy had become chaos. Refugees screamed as emergency doors slammed shut. Wounded soldiers struggled against their restraints. Medics were thrown to the floor, then pulled themselves up and went back to work as if there were no other choice. The Morvathi scientists clung to their sealed data core while hull alarms howled around them. And in the middle of it all, Eli was still conscious.
Barely. Nora and two others got him onto a stretcher. He could not stand. Every breath looked like it hurt. Blood ran from the side of his head and down his neck. One scan showed broken ribs. Another showed spinal damage. He should have been silent. He should have passed out. Instead, he gripped the stretcher rail and said, "Bridge." They brought him a comm unit. Carla heard his voice through static, weak, tight with pain, but steady. "Keep the convoy moving," he said. "No ship gets left behind." Carla stared ahead at the swarm rushing toward them. "Eli, we need to break contact." "You break contact," he said, breathing hard between words, "and they die scattered." Another escort ship took a hit. It spun away, trailing flame. Sam looked at the tactical board and went pale. "We are not winning this." Eli answered at once. "We survive it." That was the order. Not win, not destroy the enemy. Survive long enough to carry the people behind them to the next gate. The battered human convoy turned toward the Asara corridor, burning, broken, and still moving. And behind them, the swarm came faster. Pinned to a stretcher and unable to stand, Eli begins commanding the battle through broken ribs. But the only way to save the convoy may be to ask an old enemy for help.
The convoy was breaking apart. Not all at once, not in one huge dramatic moment. It was happening piece by piece, ship by ship, under a sky full of fire. A shuttle to the left lost engines and began to spin. A transport farther back was venting air in a long silver stream. The long path itself was barely holding together. Smoke rolled through the damaged corridors. Emergency bulkheads had sealed off the worst of the lower deck, but the ship still shuddered every few seconds, like it was trying not to come apart. And through all of it, the Ira kept coming. Fast, precise, merciless. Carla held the helm with both hands locked tight. Sam stood beside her, one side of his face bloody, rerouting power so often the system boards looked more red than green. Every few seconds, another alert sounded, another ship calling for help, another breach, another fire. Then a new signal cut through the noise. Sam turned sharply toward his board. Incoming fleet movement. Carla did not look away from the battle screen. Enemy? He stared for half a second longer. Then he shook his head. "No," he said, almost like he did not believe it himself. "Veil signatures." For one strange second, the bridge went quiet. Then the front display changed. A wall of Veil warships was turning in the dark. Not away, toward them. At the center of the formation was Admiral Fesk's flagship. Carla's eyes widened. What is he doing? The answer came one heartbeat later. The Veil fleet broke formation, surged past the wounded convoy, and slammed directly into the Ira attack line. The first exchange lit the corridor white. Ira ships burst apart under heavy Veil fire. The swarm scattered, regrouped, and struck back hard, but the Veil did not stop. They drove forward like they had something to repay. A channel opened. Admiral Fesk's voice filled the bridge, hard and clear. "Human vessel Longpath. This is Admiral Fesk of the Veil Defense Line. Your convoy will proceed to Asara Gateway under our escort." Carla let out one stunned breath. Why now? Eli's answer came weakly over the medbay comm. Because he finally looked. No one on the bridge spoke after that. They did not need to. Fesk had seen the wounded Veil soldiers on human decks. He had seen refugee children alive because human freighters had broken sealed routes. He had seen ordinary people bleeding in ships that could have stayed safe and did not. And something inside him had changed. But it did not stop with the Veil. Minutes later, more ships appeared on long-range scan. Tassari craft, then Drini ships, then, almost unbelievably, more Vathi escort vessels, armed and moving with cold purpose through a war zone after centuries of peace. The corridor that had almost become the convoy's grave was turning into something else. A line, a stand,
A decision made too late to erase the shame, but maybe not too late to matter. Sam stared at the growing fleet list. "They're all coming." "Yes," Carla said softly. For the first time since the attack began, her voice carried something besides strain. Hope. In medbay, Eli lay strapped to a stretcher, barely able to lift his head. Nora adjusted the support brace near his chest and told him not to speak. He spoke anyway. "Get the scientists to the gateway. Whatever happens next, get them there." The combined fleet closed around the convoy like a shield. Ahead, far beyond the battle, the Asara gateway waited. And inside the Morvathi data core was the one chance the galaxy still had to shut the breach forever. This was no longer a rescue run. It was the final race. At the Asara gateway, the Allied fleet makes its last stand. But to seal the breach, the convoy must hold long enough for the scientists to activate a plan that could tear space itself apart.
The Allied fleet held. Not easily, not cleanly, not without loss. At the edge of the Asara gateway, ships from 19 worlds burned side by side, while the last of the Morvathi scientists worked inside a shielded command core. Vale warships took the front line. Tassari carriers covered the damaged civilian convoy. Drenni defense ships locked into a hard perimeter and refused to break. Even the Morvathi, who had avoided war for centuries, stood and fought to protect the data they had nearly died carrying. It was the first time in the whole record that Saren had seen the galaxy act like one body instead of scattered, frightened parts. And still, it almost was not enough. The Ira kept coming. Wave after wave of hooked black ships slammed against the line. Explosions spread across the dark like broken stars. One Tassari cruiser lost power and drifted into the path of enemy fire. A veiled destroyer split open near the center and vanished in a white flash. The convoy tried to keep moving, but there was nowhere left to run now. Behind them was the war. Ahead of them was the gateway. Everything depended on the scientists finishing before the line broke. On the long path, Eli Marsh lay in medical under dim red light, breathing through pain that no drug could fully hide. Nora had done everything she could. Braces held his body still. Monitors tracked numbers that kept slipping the wrong way. He should have been asleep. He should have been beyond command. But the comm remained open at his side. Carla's voice came through it, hard and steady. "They're hitting our left shield line." "Shift the Drenni pair inward," Eli whispered. "Tell Fesk not to chase kills. Just hold." Nora looked down at him. "You need to stop." He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not yet." Saren felt his throat tighten. Outside, the battle grew worse. The whole gateway trembled as the collapse sequence began. The light around it twisted, bent, and folded in impossible angles. Space itself looked sick, like a wound trying to close. The Morvathi scientists called out final timing marks. Every ship in the line got the same order. Hold a little longer. Just a little longer. Then it happened. The wormhole shuddered once, violently, and the stars around it seemed to crack. A wave of white light rolled through the corridor. Ira ships caught near the edge were pulled apart like ash in a storm. The gateway screamed across every sensor. For one endless second, Saren thought the entire system would tear open. Then the breach collapsed. Silence hit the record so suddenly it felt unreal. No more swarm, no more incoming fire, no more black ships pouring out of the wound in space. The Ira were gone. The line had held long enough. The galaxy had survived. The combined fleet reached Asara Gateway on the 11th day and held long enough for the Morvathi scientists to trigger the collapse sequence, sealing the wormhole shut. Eli died 3 days later from the injuries he suffered during the convoy run, never learning what would be written because of what he and his crew had done.
Saren sat in the amber dark of the archive, unable to move. "So that was the end," he said softly. Ulara floated beside him in silence for a moment. "No," she said. "That was the part that made the law." The water around them began to glow again, and Saren realized the story was not finished yet. Saren leaves the archive to learn what happened after the war and how one dead captain's final act became a promise written into every gate in the galaxy.
Saren left the deep archive the next morning. He said very little on the ride back to the station. Asara's pale clouds drifted below the shuttle window, soft and bright, but he barely saw them. His thoughts were still with the dead, with Eli Marsh on a stretcher, still giving orders, with Carla holding a burning ship together by will alone, with Sam freezing on a hull outside a locked gate, with Nora treating strangers as if they had always mattered, with all the ordinary people who had opened doors when the rest of the galaxy had chosen fear. By the time he reached Halo Station again, something inside him had changed. The station looked the same as always. Crowded walkways, trade signals flashing overhead, security lines moving too slowly, ships arriving, unloading, vanishing again. But now Saren could see the hidden shape beneath all of it. Every date, every corridor, every checkpoint. They were not just rules and metal anymore. They were memory. He went straight to his office and began writing. Not a legal review, not a complaint, not even a recommendation. A lesson. He wrote about the old fear that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. He wrote about the species that had hidden behind walls and called it wisdom. He wrote about the human crews who had done the opposite and paid for it in blood. He wrote that the human exemption was not a reward and not a favor. It was a reminder that survival meant more than guarding your own door, a reminder that mercy had once arrived in battered freighters, cargo ships, medical shuttles, and tired human hands, a reminder that when everything broke apart, the people who mattered most were the ones who moved first. When he finished, he sent the report to the station council and leaned back in silence. Then he got up and walked to the observation level above the main docking ring. He stood there for a long time, watching ships come and go. A Drenny courier was held at scan for missing clearance codes. A Vale transport waded through weapons inspection. A Tosseri envoy argued with a transit officer over delayed authorization. The line moved slowly, like always. Then another freighter appeared. Human. Old hull, cargo worn, no special markings. The security officer scanned the pilot at the gate, checked the screen, and stepped aside without a word. The door opened. A man in a work jacket walked through with the easy, tired look of someone thinking about food, fuel costs, and his next delivery. Not history, not law, not sacrifice. Just another pilot moving through another station. For a moment, Saren smiled. That, somehow, made it mean even more. Most humans did not walk around thinking about Eli Marsh. They did not ask what had been written into the charter for them. They just kept doing what humans seemed to do best, arriving where they were needed, carrying what they could, and stepping through open doors without making a speech about it. The founding charter made the exemption permanent and unchangeable, and the plaque placed across Accord space says, in effect, that no gate should be closed against those who once opened doors for others. Below him, on a wall near the checkpoint, Saren finally noticed the old symbol he had ignored all his life. A ship passing through an open gate. Simple, quiet, easy to miss. Just beneath it was the inscription, "Let no gate be sealed against those who would open it for others. Let the humans pass." Saren stood there for a while longer, then turned and walked back into the living station. Behind him, another gate opened, and it stayed open. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope.
Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astral Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.